Well, listen, we always like to ask people when they come on the podcast, how did they get their job on The Office? And we know that you did double duty. You were a writer, but then you were also a performer. But let's start with, how did you get your job as a writer on the show?
So I was writing at Saturday Night Live from 1998 to 2004. My then girlfriend, now wife of 16 years, had moved out to LA in permanently in like 2002, and we were dating long distance. And in like 2003, it was like, all right, if this is ever going to really work, either she had to move back to New York or I had to leave and move to LA. And it made more sense for me to move to LA because there are more jobs there. So I gave my like year's notice to Lauren Michaels and said I was leaving at the end of the year, and got an agent for the first time in my life because I never needed one. And I was like, all right, I'm moving. And the first thing he told me was, this guy, Greg Daniels, is adapting the British Office for American television. And I responded, what a terrible idea. It's just a disaster. You shouldn't do this. No one should do this, because I was a huge fan of the British show. This is such a classic story, right? I was a huge fan of the British show. I thought it was absolutely brilliant. I didn't think there was any way it would ever work in America, but it was like, well, beggars can't be choosers. Like I have to get a job out there. So I came to LA sometime in, I don't even remember, like winter, I think like February, on an off week at SNL. And I had a bunch of meetings, and one of them was with Greg. So most of the meetings I had with producers were pretty standard hour-long chats, hey, here's our pilot, watch the pilot, and let's talk about the show. And I dutifully tried to, say nice things about whatever they were working on. And then I met with Greg, and my meeting with Greg was 2 hours long, more than 2 hours long. And it was so different from every other meeting. It was like intense and in-depth and fascinating. In the middle of the meeting, he said, I'm very sorry, but my back is acting up. Would you mind if I lied down? And I said, no. And so he lay on the floor on his back in front of me while I sat on his couch. So I think to an outside observer, it would look very much like we were in like Freudian analysis, where I was his therapist and he was like free associating. But he just asked the most incisive questions, the most penetrating questions about the nature of storytelling and about the British show and why it worked and what he had to do to make it work here. And I left the meeting, and I texted on my like Motorola Razr. I texted my agent, and I said, I don't know if that guy's going to offer me a job, but if he does, I'm going to take it, because I think he's going to teach me how to write. And my agent sends me that text like every 4 years back to me. He sends it back to me and says, like, you were right, you're right. So Greg offered me the job, and I happily took it. And I thought, this is obviously not going to work. It is a fool's errand to try to adapt this show for an American audience, but he's going to teach me how to write. And that's exactly what happened. In that first season, the only full-time writers really were me, Mindy, and BJ, because Lester Lewis, the late Lester Lewis, and Paul Lieberstein and Larry Wilmore were consultants. And Mindy and BJ and I had never written anything. We didn't have any idea what we were doing. And Greg basically taught a class. He taught like the true professor he is. He taught a class on how to write. And it changed all of our lives forever. So that's my Office origin story.
Wow.
That is so good.
So it was like, it was really intense work, and it was a combination of like story breaking, but also just like a master class in how to create television and what makes a good story. There were times when, I've told this story before, but there were times when Greg was talking, we would be pitching, and I had a notebook where I would like just jot down ideas. And there would be moments when Greg would say, well, let's just pause for a second and talk about like what makes a good story. And then he would start kind of like going through the list of things that he felt were crucial to good TV stories. And I would realize like, oh, he's in lecture mode, is what the way I thought of it, was lecture mode, which was a good thing. It sounds like a bad thing, but it was a good thing. And I would turn the page and I would start taking notes like I was in college. And I would just like write down as if he were an actual professor and I had a test coming up, and I would start just writing down. And I still have those notes, and I still go back and look at them every once in a while to like remember, to refresh my memory about what he told us all about storytelling. It was that intense and that sort of foundational and meaningful to all of us.
Oh, man.
Wow.
I do remember those early days about what a small collective we were. Even our table reads, do you remember? We would just pull up chairs on the stage where we were filming. We would just all grab like a desk chair and sit in a circle and read the script. And I loved that.
Mm-hmm. It was really intimate.
There were so many cool things about that first season, including that the place where we worked was on this weird soundstage in the middle of Culver City or something. And so Hollywood sound stages are often, these big, gigantic empty rooms where you put sets, and then attached to them usually or above them are a suite of offices where the writers and the production staff works. But that suite of offices became the actual set. Like the set that we built was modeled on the crappy offices where the writers were working, and right down to the layout. Like Greg was in what would be Michael's office, and there was like a reception desk right outside it that became Pam's reception desk. And so we would do these drills. Greg would have us do these drills where he would go like, okay, take a half an hour and like go sit at Pam's desk, or go sit in Michael's office, or what will be Michael's office, or go sit where Jim sits, and like just get a sense of like what is your eye line to Pam, right? So he would put Mindy at Pam's reception desk, and he would put BJ at Jim's desk, and he would say like, just sit there and like absorb the vibe of like, imagine that you're in love with that person, and that you have to like angle your chair in such a way so that you can catch a glimpse of her out of the corner of your eye or whatever. And it was fascinating. It was really interesting. And I remember at one point he had me go into work in Michael's office, or what the office that would be the model for Michael's office. And I remember hating it, because it was like I was far away from everything, and all this, and I would see people talking through the windows, and I'd be like, what are they talking about? And I had the urge to like go out and like do what Michael did all the time, which was like, hey, what's going on? Like, and it was like, he was just so, he knew so much about what he wanted out of the show, that he would practice not just the skill of writing the characters, but the skill of like embodying them or emotionally connecting to them. And it was just, that's what I mean when I say it was professorial. It wasn't just like, all right, what's episode 2? What's the act break? What's the first act break for the season finale? It was really like, we had to embody the characters and understand them emotionally and socially in a way that I think led to great episodes,
Well, it's so interesting because when all the actors got there, then they did that to us too. They made us sit at our desks and just sit there and feel it. We've talked about that before. And so I love that started all the way back with you guys writing the episodes. Yeah.
June of 2004, like they're right from the jump. There were things like that we did that weren't the typical things that you would do with a writing staff. Another thing he did all the time, which I thought was so smart, which I still do on shows that I work on now, is we would come into work one day and he would put all the characters' names on a board, and he would pick 2 of them at random, and he would say, me and Larry Wilmore, like, go come up with 5 story ideas for Oscar and Kelly. And then you, Mindy and Paul, like, go come up with 5 story ideas for, Jim and Stanley. And for an hour, we would just pitch, okay, well, what the hell could a story be with Oscar and Kelly? But it led to some really cool stuff. And like some of the B stories and the C stories of that were in the first couple seasons were just brainstorming like random pairings of people. He understood fundamentally that one of the great advantages that the show had over other shows is that we had 20 people. We had, like, most shows have 6 main characters or something. And so pretty quickly you get tired of a story involving these 2 people or these 3 people. And he was like, that's not what this is going to be. This is going to be the whole point of the show is to observe, like an anthropologist, observe the comings and goings of a large number of people in the same office environment. So like go work on random pairings, and like sometimes really fun stuff would come out of it, like he just so thoroughly understood what made the show special and what the potential was for how good it could be, that he had all of these machinations, and he was always moving pieces around the chessboard with the writers in those early days,
Yeah, I remember telling my dad, I was trying to describe this group of people and the show to my dad, who was not at all in entertainment. He's a drilling engineer, but sometimes we could talk sports. And I said, Dad, here's the deal. We have a deep bench, Dad. Mm-hmm. And it's like a basketball term. Like, our team is so good. There's so many layers to this team. And then when he came and, Greg invited them to sit at a table read at lunch, my dad was like, I get it. I get I get it. Like, because there were laughs, I think, coming from him in all these places,
Yeah.
Well, I was going to say that in season 9, John and I were invited to be producers on the show to kind of help carve out Jim and Pam's final season. And we got to come into their writer's room mostly as observers. And Greg was running the show that season, and he was still doing those exercises. And it was fascinating. Except in this case, it was more like homework. I remember the day started and Greg said, okay, get out your homework.
What?
And the homework had been that everyone had to come up with 5 ideas for, I can't remember what it was, but it was like for a Dwight and Stanley cold open. Go. And then you would just sit and listen. And then when there was an idea that piqued his interest, he would say, oh, okay, you two, go off, flesh that out. And then 2 people would leave the room, and then we would keep listening to the homework. And I remember thinking, oh my gosh, I would be so terrified to present my 5 ideas, because sometimes it was just crickets. Like, you could just hear the ideas just die in the room. I mean, what an intense and vulnerable thing to pitch your creative ideas in front of like a room of people who are all judging whether or not you should follow that thread.
Yes, one of his greatest strengths is that he is unafraid, I would say, of failure. And I believe that comes, I'm guessing that comes partially from working at Saturday Night Live, because what you just described of like pitching ideas and having them bomb, right? That is the essence of working at SNL, except your failures at SNL are public. Like, you write sketches and there's a read through with the entire cast of the show and Lorne and all the producers around a giant table, and the audience is 100 and 150 people who work on the show. And by the way, a very famous person who's hosting the show, like, Drake is reading your sketch or whatever.
Oh my God.
And there are moments at SNL where, your sketches are 12 pages long or whatever, and the sketch starts and you get to page 2 and like the joke of the sketch is sprung and no one laughs. And in your head, you're like, there's 10 more pages of this. Like, we have to sit here for 10 more pages as no one finds my premise funny. And so for the first, I don't know what Greg's experience was. I've never really talked to him about his time there, but for the first like 6 months, you fall into a deep depression. Like, it's just like, it's so embarrassing to fail that way publicly. And then the week goes by and the show happens, and then it's like, all right, it's Monday again, do it again. And you like do it again, and you fail again, and you fail, and you fail, and you fail. And eventually, at some point, hopefully, you kind of figure it out and you write a sketch and it gets some laughs. And you're like, okay, it's not the end of the world. Like, I'm still here. And then you get a little better and a little better. And that theory it's pretty brutal on your ego. But when you've already had it driven out of your ego from working at SNL, like five Stanley cold opens, I can, who cares?
No problem.
Yeah, exactly. So and his theory is really like, this is a numbers game. Like, the way to get to the best ideas is you have to create 1,000 ideas in order to find the 2 that are good. And he took that approach with everything. He took that approach when he was hiring writers. He took that approach when he was casting people. I mean, how long did the casting process go on for the show? Endlessly long. And that's just his, he's just the most thorough person when it comes to that. He doesn't settle for anything. He demands that you walk down. I mean, when we're when we were breaking stories, like we would get 5/6 of the way down the line toward breaking a story, and we'd get to a point where he would realize it didn't work, and he would go like, "Man, this doesn't work. Throw it away. Start over." And it's really exhausting, but also
Wow.
the show lasted for 10 years and it was really good. So,
and here we are still talking about it.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah. 17 years later.
Wow.